I recently saw a short where someone, presumably a successful academic, said something I found extraordinarily ill-informed. We are identical to our brains, she said. We know this. When I countered this assertion in the comments, I was almost immediately trolled by a tech bro who makes gaming videos. There's no doubt in my mind the original poster is a very smart person, but here's the thing very smart people get it wrong all the time. I don't quite want to rise to the level of RFK Jr.'s insistence that trusting experts is not part of science or the democratic process, which, while not an entirely wrong proposition, does not mean that the exact opposite assertion that experts should never be trusted is entirely right. But I digress in the pursuit of handy and timely hashtags. A key piece of advice when questioning the work product of the scientific method is you still have to use the scientific method to do it. No one ever checks a statistical analysis against tarot cards. The only way we could dispositively know if we are in fact identical to our brains would be to remove a brain, keep it alive in a jar or something, and then communicate with it in some meaningful way against some sort of rubric to see if it was still fundamentally the same person. By the way, we don't particularly have a rubric for that now for people who still have their brain in their head where it belongs, which is an important point before we start plucking out people's brains and wiring them up. It's a much more metaphysical question than anything else. It would also be cheating if you could simulate the brain into believing everything was still the same. It had a body perambulating through some simulated environment. You'd have to raw dog the whole thing, which gives our first insight into why the idea that we are identical to our brain is demonstrably wrong. When the body shuts down every night for sleep, if you're luckier than I am, at least in that regard, what dreams may come may involve you as a unique perspective, but even when it contains biographical content, however surrealistically portrayed, it's never quite the you that anyone else would recognize as you when you're awake. In our dreams, we can be far more courageous. By contrast, we can be far more cowardly as well and otherwise really not recognizably the same person in a non-oneiristic state, even though that's pretty much at that point all brain. It's a very common trope out there to isolate a brain. Most recently, it was used in the three body problem to save on payload weight. Not only does the brain weigh less if you want to put it in a spaceship, but the poor guy was otherwise dying of cancer. Personally, I would still be very hesitant to do it, though there have been some advances which may make things like head transplants and isolated brain revival more feasible. It's the kind of thing that makes medical ethicists quail and leaves me feeling a bit queasy. We don't really know how it would go because so far we've only tried it with animal models. Even those kind of freak me out. And in one case where they were using brains from pigs that had died in the slaughterhouse, they had to very carefully monitor it to make sure the pig brain didn't become conscious. Yeah. Beyond that, there are other things that would force us to question not just the efficacy of the conjecture that we are identical to our brains. In my opinion, it doesn't even rise to the level of a hypothesis. Certainly, the brain does a lot of work, maybe most of it. We also have neurons in our heart and our gut. As women have long suspected, men have a fair number of neurons in their junk, although the bad news for them is women have even more in their hoo-hoo. As always, I'm going to have to ask you to forgive the scientific jargon I use in these videos. One of the more interesting and emergent fields in psychology is the very surprising role that our gut flora seems to have on measurable behaviors. These are flora and animalcules that we wouldn't even particularly consider part of what we really are, at least in isolation. Such microbes tend to be environmentally acquired, of course. Our brain structure itself is very heavily influenced by environmental factors. The same brain raised through childhood in different circumstances would absolutely result in a different person in many ways. Some things are relatively hardwired, but again, not nearly enough to assert that one is identical to the brain in some mechanical reductionist sense. As with any of the subjects I cover on this channel, I do not expect my videos to be the last word on it, not even by me. As the saying goes, if the human brain were simple enough to be understandable, humans would be too simple to understand it. Of course, we can't perfectly understand bumblebee brains either. Despite being radically reduced in size, extremely complex behaviors emerge from it. If you would like to be in on conversations about the brain and other things related to psychology, please like and subscribe. Leave me a question in the comments below. I've got more of these coming. Take care of yourself.